stories, and some men did when I was growing up, but mainly the women, the grandmothers. So it started with, and there's three, actually maybe four things that are named in the story. And one is the grandmother, and there's a granddaughter, and a grandson. So and then there's also a crow. So it starts with the grandmother came after doing chores during the day, came into where they lived, and she was tired, and she asked the granddaughter to get her water because she was thirsty. And the granddaughter wasn't a very good granddaughter, didn't want to listen to her grandmother, so she told the grandmother to ask her younger brother to get water for her. The grandson was so small that she told him that he was too little to go after water. I mean, it wasn't like run into the kitchen and turn your faucet on. You had to go outside to a spring well. So the girl kept telling the grandmother to tell the boy to go after the water for her. And this went on for a few minutes, and then on the fifth time that the grandmother asked the granddaughter to get her water, and she told the grandmother the same thing, and let her brother get the water for her. And slowly she told the granddaughter, if you don't get water for me, I'm going to turn into a crow. That's the way I feel like. I'm going to be so thirsty that I'm going to transform into a crow. So she kept telling the granddaughter to get her water, and all of a sudden she started changing her form. She actually started changing into a crow. She started making a noise like the crow does, and caw, caw, and feathers started coming out of her body. And the granddaughter got scared and told the grandmother not to turn into a crow, and she was going to get her grandmother the water. So she gets a container and runs down to the spring. And she comes back, and the grandmother had already turned into a crow. And the granddaughter was chasing the crow around in the lodge. She was trying to throw water on her grandmother, but already turned into a crow. But she didn't turn back into her grandmother, so she's chasing her around. And finally, the crow flies out of the lodge, and the granddaughter is chasing the crow down, still trying to throw water on her. But the crow was so fast that she took off. And the granddaughter couldn't keep up with the crow. So, not knowing what to do, she goes back to the lodge. And her brother's in there, seeing what had happened, and he's there crying because he's little, so he's crying, and then the granddaughter also was crying. They didn't know what to do, so granddaughter, they're all left alone. So she gets the grandson, her brother, and they're gonna go to their other relatives. So they leave the lodge. And these stories that I'm telling, it's like the chapters in your books, chapter 1, chapter 2. So you get on to the next section of the story where the children leave the lodge and starts heading to their relatives to let them know what had happened. But before they even get there, something else happens to them. On their way on the trail, this lady who is a giant, like a monster lady is what they call her. So in our language, they call her Tatatliayai, which means she's a giant lady. So she grabs them, puts the children in a container that she packs in her back. So she's taking them to her children so that she can feed those children to her own children. So they get kidnapped actually by this giant lady. So she's going and these children are in her back. And the boy has stuff in his pouch like shells, seashells, rocks. And every time she's walking or running and then those things start making noise, and she stops and she looks around and she thinks she hears her children crying. So she keeps moving, and then she says that she hears her children crying. So she stops, and then the granddaughter tells the boy to shake his sack so that she can hear more. So that goes on for I don't know how many miles until the boy shakes the bag a little louder, and then the giant looks around and says, "Those are my children crying, so I gotta get to my home." So she throws the backpack that she's carrying with the children, throws them on the ground and leaves and runs to where her home is. So she actually gets tricked into leaving the children with the container of shells and rocks that the boy had in his pouch. So they actually saved themselves, getting ate up by the giant lady's babies or children. So that's two chapters that I'm telling you that kind of condensed form. It just keeps going on from that, but I'm not really sure how long I'm supposed to tell the story.
So if you think about the story, do you have any questions about the story? And remember, question is like asking something, right?
Yeah.
Not telling something. So do you have a question really about the story?
Is it real?
Is the story real? Ask.
Is it real?
No, it's what you would call a fairy tale. See, watch cartoons or movies, a lot of stuff is make-believe. But the stories that I was told, it's like a lesson. Because the grandmother asked the granddaughter for water, and the granddaughter didn't want to get water for her. So that's a lesson for a child to learn, because a child should listen to their elder or their grandmother when they're asked to do something. So that's a lesson there.
So Ruth, it's kind of teaching a lesson. It's kind of like the moral to the story. When you talk about morals or legends, a lot of times they'll teach a lesson. So maybe the lesson is that please listen to what the elders in your family are asking you to do.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Any other questions? Yes,
And
Carter?
like don't be mean.
That could be another lesson in there, right? Treat others kindly. All right. Any other questions about the story? Okay. Ariel, do you have a question about the story?
Yeah.
What question do you have?
So if you need to go camping, do you go camping?
Let's see. Now, do you have a question, maybe not about the story, but a question about Native Americans or about Mr. George's life? Anything you want to ask him about that? About what it was like when he was growing up? Was that how many stories did his grandma tell him? Did other people tell him some legends or things about their culture? Do you have any questions like that?
Yeah.
How many of you want to know a little bit about his growing up? Because when he was your age. Yeah, he could maybe tell us something about that, what it was like. Different probably than now.
Did you? Yeah.
Okay, so let's let him. Did you have a question though, Ruthie?
Did you live in
A house?
this?
Yeah, I did. I grew up with my dad's family, his mom and dad. And it's east from here. It's northeast of a town called Roosevelt. You guys know where Roosevelt is? Well, it's east from here. I was born on the Yakima Reservation at White Swan near Fort Simcoe. You guys know where Fort Simcoe is? If you ever go to Fort Simcoe, on the way before you get there, there's an old house near a creek on the left-hand side. And the house is still there, but I don't think anybody lives there. And it's probably a house like this. And I was born there in 1948. So that makes me a little older man. And but I didn't grow up on the reservation. I started. Well, World War II, they moved my grandparents and my parents from the home that we lived in at Pine Creek, which is near Roosevelt. Because of the war, they were sending planes to look at that county for how many square miles they were. The Air Corps was target practicing there. So that's the reason they moved a lot of families out of that area. So my dad and mother moved us to Umatilla Reservation, which is near Pendleton, Oregon. That's where me and my two older brothers lived for a number of years.
And so how many brothers and sisters did you have? So maybe I would think if that's going to be more than yours or less than yours.
Yeah, well, there was 8 of us. There was 6 of us brothers and 2 sisters. One of our sisters was the oldest. And I had 2 older brothers, and then me. Three younger brothers and a younger sister. So that's 8 of us. But only 4 of us, or 3 of us brothers, and my sister lived in Oregon before. After the war was over, my mother moved us to Rock Creek. Rock Creek Canyon is just east from here too, so that's this way. And I went to school in a one-room school. I don't know if you guys ever heard of a one-room school. And it went from 1st to 8th grade. And all the students were in one large room with one teacher. And her name was Helen Emery. And years ago I was at a graduation here in Goldendale, and this teacher I met, he was complaining about the work he has to do, that he needed a helper. And that's a helper like my wife used to be. And I laughed at him and I said, you know, when I went to school from 1st grade on up at Goodnow, this lady that was my teacher, she should have had a helper, because she not only taught us, but she used to drive the bus. And then when she got to school, she was our teacher. And she even cooked for us. So she was a cook, and she was probably a janitor because she cleaned the school too. And that was at Goodnow, and that's east from Goldendale. So that's where my education started, at Goodnow. And she retired, and then we got bused here to Goldendale. I went to school here in Goldendale for a few years. And then I went to school in Oklahoma. And then from Oklahoma I went to New Mexico. But I met my wife in Oklahoma. So, vocational school, I went to Tacoma. And I went to school in Seattle for a while. So that's my education life. I helped build an aluminum plant when it started. The main place I worked was in Oregon, Portland, and Big River. So I've lived in this area most of my life, but not all.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions about Mr. George's schooling? I mean, when he was a kid, what his school was like, or anything like that? Any questions like that? What was one of your favorite things about school?
Well, I got taught art when I was in the 1st grade, and I took to art pretty well. So at a young age I became an artist. know you could get paid doing that until I got older. And I imagine the games were different. I remember the boys always played marble games. I don't know if you guys ever played with marbles, but these days. Back when my older brothers were going to school in Pendleton, they always had marble tournaments, and my brothers always were the top winners doing that kind of game. There was a lot of other different types of games that you would play at the Goodnow where I went to school.
How many of you like art in school? Raise your hand if you like to do art things. That's always a fun thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's different kinds of art too. Oh, here's Molly. Is that's our signal?
Yeah, are we about done or?
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
So we stay here until they tell us to move to the next one?
Okay.
All right. So what do we say to Mr. Eddie George for telling us a story and sharing part of his life? We say thank you.
Thank you.